All right, welcome to our first lesson. Right now, at whatever time you're listening to this, there is uncertainty looming in the air. And uncertainty and fear make an experience of increased stress, of anxiety. The impact of stress on our lives impacts our relationship, it impacts our physiological nervous system. It's actually at the root of cellular inflammation. It impacts our mental health. It creates greater anxiety, depression, exacerbates trauma, leads to more addictive behaviors. Most of the time, our brain's wired to try and stay away from stress. And so what it does is it starts to try and avoid it. And how does it do that? It either thinks more about the future, what's going to be coming up in the future, or it gets stuck in the past trying to reflect back on ways, almost like it's mining information to try and figure out how to relate to the stress, how to get rid of it. And what that typically does is that makes us get stuck in an emotional loop that allows us to try and avoid that, which leads to behaviors of maybe overeating or not sleeping well, all the things that make us feel really not well. In 2006, I did a national research study where I took people from all over the United States and I gave them a very simple practice. The practice was to come to their bodies, take a deep breath, check in with how they're feeling, what they're thinking, the sensations in their body, and then to be able to relate to something that was meaningful to them. And what we found was that just that simple practice, 5 minutes a day for 5 days a week for 3 weeks, has statistically significant results in stress reduction and a variety of scales of well-being. You can find this study published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology. But the most interesting part of this was when I interviewed all the people. And what I found was that epicenter of these statistically significant results that we all want in our lives was connection. You know, my wife and I were away when the coronavirus hit in the United States. I'll never forget the first text that I got telling me that in Los Angeles, where we live, that there was a big eruption that was happening there. And while we were away, we're getting a wonderful getaway from my wife and I, from our 3 kids, to be able to spend time and enjoy ourselves and reconnect and refill our cups. And what inevitably happened was all of a sudden this came in and this thought came into my mind, oh my God, are we not going to be able to get back into LA? Am I not going to be able to get back to my kids? And my nervous system shot up. Both my wife and I, you can see us, if you're watching it like a movie, you can see us walking back and forth in this beautiful hotel room that we had. But we weren't really enjoying it, back and forth, my heart beginning to race. I'm starting to sweat. And my mind's going to all the worst case scenarios that can possibly happen. I was caught in something in that moment that I call a stress loop. This is a conditioned reaction that we all experience of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and actions. And left unchecked, this could keep us into a state where we lose control or lose a perceived sense of control, which makes us feel even more anxious or more stressed, taking us away from a sense of perspective and what we actually need in that moment. And what I needed to do in that moment was be able to name it. So I was able to name it, like, here I am, my body, tense right here. I'm noticing it, and I'm caught in this stress loop. I said it a few times, stress loop, stress loop, stress loop. It didn't help me to pace back and forth and constantly check my email and text. I needed to be aware of what was happening. But at the same time, I didn't need to be suffering so much through it. So I took a deep breath. I released for a moment. I looked around. There was the ocean. It was right outside of our window. I could hear the birds in the air. And I could feel the wind because I was outside that was there brushing against my body. I was present again there. I was kind of calming down my body. And I was interrupting that fight, flight, freeze response. I was interrupting that automatic loop that was there. You see, our job is to recognize when we get caught in stress loops. This is the very first lesson. Knowing what stress is to you, how it manifests, thoughts, emotions, sensations in the body, what kind of actions do you take? What does your stress loop look like? And then being able to recognize that, because when you're able to recognize that, you're able to step into a space between stimulus and response and interrupt the loop. We'll talk more about that in the next lesson. Viktor Frankl, it was a Holocaust survivor, a psychiatrist, and neurologist, and he has that quote. That's where that comes from. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. We want to be able to recognize what stress is. What is your stress? Think about this for a second. Thoughts. What thoughts come up in your mind when you get stressed? How does your body feel? Where is it tensing? Where is it bracing when you get stressed? What emotions do you have that typically come from that? Anxiety, or maybe just stress, or maybe it's a different emotion that's there. Maybe you get frustrated when you get stressed. What's the sensation? What's the emotion? What are the thoughts? So recognizing this for yourself, recognizing where you're bracing, and beginning to take a deep breath, soften your body. There's a really important phrase that's been out there in the ether that says, wherever your focus goes, an energy tends to flow. And you know this, when you're focused on worries, you typically invite the energy of anxiety. When you're focused on memories, beautiful memories of the past, you typically have like a softness and a warmth that comes to your heart. You could try it out for yourself. So I want to give you a tip. One way to be able to come down from the stress loop when it's there, and this is something I call the 3x3 practice. Reorient yourself to the present moment by saying to yourself, what are 3 things that I'm seeing right now? What are 3 things that I'm hearing right now? And what are 3 things that I'm feeling right now? And by doing that, what's happening is you're interrupting that stress loop. You're stepping into that space between stimulus and response, and you're coming back to the present moment. You're literally bringing blood flow back to your prefrontal cortex that sits right behind your forehead, that's involved with emotion regulation, impulse control, executive function, to be able to make the best choice that you have in this next moment. And even with this simple practice, what you'll find is your mind may not let you pay attention even for that short period of time. It might go off and think about this or worry about that, taking you away from this moment back into the stress loop. So when that happens, just say to yourself, thinking, thinking, thinking. Say it a few times, or you can say stress loop, stress loop, stress loop. Or you can notice where your body is tensing, because typically it's going to be tensing in that moment. Take a moment, take a deep breath, soften your body, or maybe do a gentle stretch, and then very gently come back to this practice, 3x3. And remember, this takes practice and repetition like anything else. That's how our brain memorizes procedures. Practice and repetition, we get better and better at it. And that's how we create mastery. So beautiful. So remember, what's your stress loop? Recognizing it when it's happening by naming it, and then interrupting it with this 3x3 practice, so then you can reorient your focus. And we'll be talking about in the next number of lessons where we want to reorient our focus to. So you've completed lesson 1. Congratulations. Take it in. Practice this. Practice and repetition with this. Then when you're ready, move on to lesson 2, and I'll see you in there.